Alright, so here's how I am with Quentin Tarantino movies. I watched Pulp Fiction once. It was quite a few years ago, and it's actually still among the best writing I've ever seen in anything. Just fantastic, out of the park. And I watched the Kill Bill movies recently, and they were pretty good. I like the second one more because it has more to do with the story, whereas the first one is just action, 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 but probably among the most stylistic movies I've ever seen. And that's pretty much my entire experience with Quentin Tarantino. Like, I've heard he's just this maestro of filmmaking, that every single one of his movies is just a knock out of the park. I felt that way about Pulp Fiction, but not so much the Kill Bill movies. So now what do I think of his ninth movie? Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. There's an ellipses there. So Once Upon a Time in Hollywood stars Tarantino veterans Leonardo DiCaprio and Brad Pitt as old-time actor Rick Dalton and his stunt double Cliff Booth. Takes place in 1969 in Hollywood, obviously. And the story more or less involves the Manson murders. For those of you who don't know, back in 1969, an actress named Sharon Tate, played in this movie by Margot Robbie, and a few of her friends were murdered in her home by Charles Manson and a few hippies. So this movie's gonna recall those accounts and just what it was like to be in Hollywood in 1969. Now we have our ninth Quentin Tarantino movie. Now I was looking forward to this movie because, like I said, I heard Quentin Tarantino was just this maestro of making movies. There's still quite a few movies of his that I really want to watch, like Hateful Eight and Django Unchained and Glorious Bastards, because I heard all those movies are just amazing. As for this one though, I was expecting better. I mean, I didn't think this movie was bad by any means. You know, Leonardo DiCaprio knocks it out of the park as he always does. He's a great actor. Brad Pitt, though, he has some hilarious moments in this movie. He was pretty much the standout for me. There were quite a few points throughout the film where the audience around me, including myself, we were just laughing out loud at something he said or did. So yeah, I thought he was great. Oh, and I guess Margot Robbie's also in this movie too. She was marketed as like a big part of this movie, but she's really not in the movie that much. She's in quite a few scenes, but she doesn't do that much in those scenes. You get the feeling, oh, she plays Sharon Tate in this movie because it involves the Manson murders, and Sharon Tate was like the big name of the Manson murders. So we need Sharon Tate in this movie. Let's get Margot Robbie to play her. She's a big name right now. As if the names Quentin Tarantino, Leonardo DiCaprio, and Brad Pitt aren't enough to sell this movie. I just feel like Sharon Tate in this movie could have been played by any blonde chick. But really, that's not the main reason this movie was kind of a bummer for me. This movie is 2 hours and 40 minutes long. And normally for me, that would be a big plus. I'm like, yeah, the movie's taking its time to tell the whole story here. But with this movie, there's really not much story to tell. The first 2/3 of this movie, I felt like nothing was really happening. Like, the movie goes back and forth between what Leonardo DiCaprio's doing, what Brad Pitt is doing, and what Margot Robbie's doing, because they're all in their own, like, isolated situations, and the movie just goes back and forth between them with, like, no transitions, because there were no transitions in this movie, which really just made the pacing feel really weird to me. In the first 2/3 of this movie, it takes place, like, in the course of a day, and it's just a normal day. It's just, oh, here's what Leonardo DiCaprio's character is up to, and nothing really happens, nothing really exciting. Therefore, I don't feel like the movie needed to be as long as it was. I feel like it could have easily shaved, like, half an hour off of this thing, because it was just dragging on. I'm like, can something happen, please? With that being said, I get that it was more about the immersion of being in Hollywood in 1969. Wow, what a time. And I did get that. I was like, wow, check out Hollywood. I've been to Hollywood a million times. I live in LA. But it did truly feel like a different time period. That's always cool to see. Especially places where I go all the time. Like, there's a park in Chatsworth. It's called Stony Point. I drive past it all the time on my way to the freeway. So there's a scene in this movie that takes place at that park. And I was like, wow, it looks like it was actually shot there, which it probably was. I always like it in movies where I see a place where I've been a million times. I don't know, that's just a thing with me. I'm pretty sure, like, for those of you who have not been to Hollywood or LA, you obviously won't get that same feeling that I did. Like, there's a scene towards the end that takes place in a restaurant. My brother was sitting next to me. He was like, I was just at that restaurant a couple weeks ago. I just thought that was pretty funny. I think that's great. And of course, it's always nice to see how the film business operates. Like, as far as Leonardo DiCaprio's storyline goes, he plays an actor, so he's shooting like a Western type thing. So his story in the first 2/3 of the movie, you get to see like a peek behind the curtain of the filmmaking industry. That's always cool to see. Like, remember that movie Hail Caesar that came out a few years ago? It reminded me of that. In a good way and a bad way, though. Because like that movie, it felt like this movie was like an inside joke with the filmmakers. Like, yeah, this is Quentin Tarantino's love letter to the filmmaking industry of old. Nice. And those of us who live in LA will get that. For the rest of the world, I don't know if they'll get it. But really, it's the last act of this movie that really saved it for me. That's all I'm gonna say. I liked it though. It was good. As far as the music goes, it's not about the score. It's one of those movies that's more about the soundtrack. And I thought I would know more songs in this movie than I actually ended up knowing. I knew a couple of the songs, but I didn't know a lot of them. But it was a good soundtrack, you know? It's all 60s music. Who doesn't like that kind of stuff? And it is part of the immersive aspect of the movie. Like, this movie has a lot of scenes where someone's driving in a car and you hear the radio ads. There were points where it felt like a little forced. I'm like, I get it, I'm in the 60s. You don't have to blast radio ads whenever you're in the car. I can already tell by the car you're driving and the clothes you're wearing and the music I've been hearing and the ads I'm seeing everywhere else all over Hollywood. I'm just saying. So yeah, I don't know. In the end, this movie was kind of boring for me. I mean, the acting was good, Margot Robbie was good, and there are also some pretty hot chicks in this movie. I thought the humor was pretty funny. I love the environment, you know, Old Town Hollywood. Who doesn't like seeing that? It's just that this movie was so slow, and I know that I usually say I prefer movies to be slow, but there's another side to that sometimes a movie can be too slow, and it just drags on like nothing really happens. That's the sensation I got from this movie. It doesn't really pick up until Act 3, but it is Act 3 that does make this movie worth checking out. So for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, I will say, wait until this movie's at a discount theater, then go see it. I do still want to watch more of Tarantino's movies though. So Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, have you seen it? What did you think about it? And what is your favorite Quentin Tarantino movie? Whatever you think, go ahead and leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe.